time for the annual meeting question period. As I mentioned previously, members can enter their questions through the chat feature in the session. We will do our best to answer as many questions as time permits. If there are questions left unanswered, college staff will respond to those questions via email within the next 2 weeks. In order to accommodate questions from as many members as possible, we would ask that you limit yourself to one question only. I would now like to ask Sarah Chaudhry, the college's Director of Communications, to read some of your questions.
So I'll now begin with the first question that was submitted. Once again, just a reminder, you can submit your question in the chat feature on the right-hand side of the virtual portal. So the first question comes from Jacqueline Lynn. What changes will the college make that will impact the ongoing practice of Indigenous children in foster care?
Thank you, Jacqueline, for that question. I'll ask Lise if she could add some comments with regards to that.
So thank you. Oh, my apologies. I wanted to thank you, Jacqueline, for that excellent question. I think what your question raises is the global impact and the huge impact of the year that we have just experienced, and all of the changes over the past year with respect to not only COVID-19, but also issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the shameful histories of the social work and social service work professions with respect to Canada's Indigenous communities have all come to the fore. And what this has led to is an expansion of the college's understanding of its role as a regulator. And so at our college, we've seen that in a couple of very important ways. One of them is that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a strategic priority of the college under its new strategic plan, and that the college is committed to examining its policies and processes, as all organizations need to be now, and I think we could all say this is a long overdue process. So the first part would be examining our own practices and policies. The second part is supporting members in their practice, which includes ensuring anti-racist practice and advocacy for social justice issues, which includes, of course, the residential schools and their ongoing impact, as well as the child welfare system. Thank you.
Thank you, Lise. So the next question we have, will the college release a statement with regards to the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, so the AODA, and contributions members can make to advance the meeting of its goal of 2025?
Thank you very much for this question as well. I can't speak to releasing a statement specifically, but what I can say is that the AODA and issues of accessibility certainly fall under the college's strategic priority in its new strategic plan around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the college ensures that it is addressing issues of accessibility and equity in its practices. We also have, as I'm sure that most of you will have seen, a newly created Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Group, which is beginning its work, and we will be looking at the broad range of issues, and as I just referred to previously, the college's operations, organizational policies and practices with respect to accessibility and the AODA.
Thank you, Lise. We have a question and a comment from Elisa Suarez. Outstanding leadership. You all are committed at the college. Thank you, Lise, Mukesh, and the team. We too, in our respective fields, are reliving and recreating per the challenges of this pandemic. And then now her question. May we please know what are other measures you are contemplating to prioritize and reduce expenses considering some financial difficulties most are experiencing, but not sacrificing the quality of services you continue to render?
Thank you, and I'm going to do my best to. I certainly remember your very kind and positive comments about the leadership at the college, and thank you. I share that privilege with all of the leadership here at the college, including the College Council. In terms of expenses, and I'm thinking what your question relates to is really one that comes up every year, which is the issue sometimes of the reality of members' practice and practice situation, employment situation, and the issue of member fees and the fact that the college is fully funded by member fees. So we were very pleased that council made the decision not to increase fees for 2021 or 2022, and that we continue to monitor our resources extremely carefully. With our prudent use of resources is really something that has underlies all our work at all times, not just during COVID. So we're carefully examining all of our practices in light of the changes. I don't think any organization is ever going to go back to doing things just the way they did them before. And there certainly have been some opportunities and efficiencies and sometimes cost-saving measures. Sometimes some measures are not, while virtual may not necessarily involve fewer resources, in some cases they even involve more resources. But we continue to be very, very aware of member fees and the impact on members, while balancing that with the cost of professional regulation and the cost of protecting the public. So a certain reality is that there is a certain cost to protecting the public and operationalizing our obligations as a regulator. Thank you.
Thanks, Lise. We have a question from Danielle Perron-Roach. Under what conditions will in-person, group, and individual social work practice be allowed?
Well, that, I was going to say the million-dollar question, but it's probably the billion-dollar question at the moment. I think that there are so many unknowns, and if this year has, or it's over a year, if this last year has taught us anything, it's that it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen and exactly how it's going to happen. But we've endeavored throughout the past year and really since the very beginning of the pandemic to communicate with and provide guidance to our members around their practice. And so that guidance, as you know, is very much influenced or guided by the advice of public health authorities and government, and so we will continue to do that. And that will in turn flow down to that advice will impact decisions about recommendations that the college is making in terms of returning to in-person practice. So of course there are a number of factors that members need to consider in terms of returning to in-person practice, but unfortunately we're not quite at that position where we can offer clear guidance in relation to that at this point.
Thank you, Lise. We have a question from Leslie Greentree. How will the college address and prioritize the fast-growing affordable housing crisis we are currently facing?
So I think this is a very important issue impacting all of us in Ontario and across Canada, of course. I think housing, like other social justice issues, is something that may fall under the practice of our members. So advocacy is something that is part of social work practice and that is addressed in the scope of practice of both social work and social service work. And so the college will continue, and you'll notice in our strategic plan, we talk about about providing resources to support members in ethical and professional practice. So I would say that the issues related to housing as you're raising them really fall under members' understanding of their role as social workers and social service workers in practicing ethically and professionally, and that there is indeed an advocacy role for social workers and social service workers at their different levels of practice.
We have another question related to fees. Will members who have lost their jobs or those who had to reduce their workload and income get some waiver in their membership fee?
So thank you again for raising the issue of member fees, and as I have mentioned a few moments ago, the college very carefully considered the issue of member fees as it always does in making a recommendation for the year to come, and consideration of that takes into account, or council's consideration of member fees and recommendations and approval for the year to come always takes into consideration the reality of members and their practice, and of course this year, of course, the ongoing impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and balancing that with the need for the college to maintain its regulatory operations and fulfill its mandate of public protection. So based on that, the decision of council was to approve no increase to member fees in 2022. However, there is no waiver. That fee applies to all college members.
So we've received a question from Abdul. Why has the college not taken a public stance on residential school children murder and our role in this genocide?
Thank you for the question, and I think really what I hear as a positive challenge to the college to carefully consider its regulatory role. And as I mentioned earlier, I think one of the things that all regulators, including our college as a regulator, has done very appropriately is to look very carefully at what its role is as a regulator. And to that end, the college has made some changes in terms of its communication strategies, and you will have noticed that the college did make a statement about the tragic events in BC and the shameful history of the social work and social service work professions. I've also spoken about the college's new strategic plan, and specifically the priority around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I would say that there is much work to be done, many difficult and challenging conversations to be had for sure, but the college takes this issue and this work extremely seriously.
We have a question from Roxanne. Does the college have Indigenous representation within the college? And does the college have ongoing historic and present Indigenous education put in place, not just a one-time workshop to tick a box?
So I would very much agree that it is essential for the college and other organizations to ensure that it isn't approaching issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion as a tick box or a one-off activity just to say that something has been done. So as I hope I've been conveying, the college takes this ongoing work extremely seriously. Very recently, in November and December, the Council approved an executive created a diversity, equity, and inclusion task group, which is beginning its work. And part of the creation of the task group and the establishment of terms of reference of the task group was to call for expressions of interest beyond the college council. So while there is certainly diversity on the college's council or governing board, like many organizations, there is still lots of work to be done, and specifically in terms of representation from Indigenous communities. So I'm very pleased to say that there is Indigenous representation on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Group, but I would also suggest that the ensuring that these critical issues around the impact of the practice of our professions and anti-Indigenous racism in Canada is not something that is going to be addressed by representation alone, though that is one aspect of working on these important issues.
We have a question related to social justice and social change from Nancy. What measures can you put in place to mitigate the discriminatory practice that goes on in some schools of social work against minority students and the power over situation?
Thank you for this question. I appreciate you raising concerns about what I'm understanding to be an experience of systemic racism at perhaps schools of social work. And I don't think any organization is unfortunately free from the need to look at its policies and practices and consider very carefully the degree to which systemic racism and oppression might be operationalized in the practices of those organizations. So I certainly appreciate that question, and it sounds to me as though you're raising the need for some very important consideration and work to be done. Having said that, the college's authority is over its members, and so it has authority over, through the Social Work and Social Service Work Act, we regulate the practice of our members, and we also have control over our own organizational policies and processes, which we are very much looking at and considering very carefully. However, we do not it would be up to the schools of social work and the social service work programs to examine concerns about systemic racism and its impact in those programs.
Thank you, Lise. We have a question from Ashley Cochran. Thank you all for your updates and leadership. I'm wondering if the college can speak to the call on the government to organize an emergency national action summit to address Islamophobia and extremism. This is in light of the most recent tragedy in London, Ontario, and the pending terrorist charges in addition to the murder charges, as well as the ongoing hate crimes across Canada.
So, once again, I want to thank you for this question about anti-Muslim hate crime that we have all been so impacted by so recently in London. As you know, the college did issue an e-bulletin responding to those tragic events. In terms of the college's direct role in I'm sorry, I was missing the actual name of the group. It's the
Emergency National Action Summit to address Islamophobia and extremism. So
right.
The call on the government to organize a national summit.
Right. So I was speaking earlier in relation to the question about housing. I think questions about systemic racism are also social justice questions, and we have a very important role in supporting members' ethical and professional practice with respect to various social justice issues. So advocacy falls under the scopes of practice for both social work and social service work, and I would expect to see that our members will be very involved in that work, as will, I would imagine, the professional associations.
Thank you, Lise. We have a question related to ongoing education from AHMED. I hope we could have ongoing continuing education sessions with the college, with credit hours or in different areas of practice. It would be beneficial for social workers and social service workers, and also available consultations for private practice members to cover if they have any issues that may come up?
Right. Well, thank you for that two-part question, and I'm going to address it in two parts. I think I would say that the college, as I've been speaking to, supports members' ethical and professional practice in providing a number of resources, educational resources. And we also, of course, have the Continuing Competence Program, or CCP. And I think we're very proud of the college's approach to continuing competence in that it's an adult learning model where members complete a self-assessment, review the standards of practice, and set their own learning goals so that members may identify a whole range of learning activities and learning resources that they might want to use in order to fulfill those learning goals. It would most typically be a professional association who provides different kinds of specific professional development opportunities, and certainly that is the case for college members, both social workers and social service workers, through the opportunities provided by the Ontario Association of Social Workers, among many other opportunities and resources. The second part of your question relating to professional consultations, as you know, the college has continued its regulatory operations throughout the pandemic, and our professional practice team is no exception to that. And they continue to provide not only presentations to students and who are soon to be new graduates in social work programs and social service work programs, but also to members in their workplaces. So that's a form of information and professional development support. But the professional practice team also provides professional practice consultations to members of the public, to members, and to employers when issues of concern arise. So if you haven't accessed this service before, I'd really encourage you to visit the professional practice pages on the college website, and also through that to contact our professional practice staff, who would be very pleased to consult with you.
Thank you, Lise. And just a reminder, in order to accommodate all the questions from as many members as possible, we would ask that we try and limit one question per member. I have another question related to advocacy. Advocacy is not always well received within the institutions where social workers are employed. What practical support can we receive from the college?
So this I think in a certain way falls under the previous question, in that it can be a very challenging question for members to consider what their advocacy should be in relation to certain issues and within their organization on a broad range of issues, particularly ensuring that members are able to practice in accordance with the Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice. And I would encourage members who are experiencing challenges around advocacy and the responses to their advocacy in their workplace to consider consulting with the college's professional practice team to discuss the specifics of the situation. I'd also remind you of the Ethics A decision-making tool, ethical decision-making tool that the college released in the past year, because that can be a very helpful resource for members who are facing such challenging decisions in their practice and in their workplaces.
Thank you, Lise. We have a question from Megan related to virtual mental health care platforms. What is the college doing to support members in being able to run businesses and compete in these spaces? She also has a follow-up question. Can you speak to changes or collaborations with other colleges across Canada that can allow social workers or social service workers more flexibility to compete with the virtual mental health care platforms?
Thanks very much for this question as well, and it sounds like I'm going to have to remember the two pieces to this question as well. So I'm going to start with the first. And I want to emphasize that the college's role is to protect the public, and part of how the college fulfills that public protection mandate is to ensure that members are practicing ethically and professionally. So the college's role would not be to support members so that they could compete in an employment environment, including in relation to virtual platforms. That would be more something that a professional association would look at and support its members in relation to. Having said that, the college does have a lot of information on the website under the professional practice pages around virtual platforms and electronic practice. So again, if you haven't seen the various resources that the college has developed around electronic practice, I'd really encourage you to visit those professional practice pages. In terms of the second part of your question, I want to say that the college and the profession of social work, I'm not saying social service work, since social service work is not regulated in other provinces across Canada, not currently regulated in other provinces across Canada. But in terms of the regulation of social work, there have been ongoing and continue to be ongoing communications with other Canadian social work regulators to look at the whole range of issues related to electronic practice and mobility. One of the things that we have done at our college, and it predated the pandemic, is to enable members who are registered in good standing in another Canadian province and who undertake to practice exclusively by electronic means with a client in Ontario to register at a greatly reduced fee. So again, that information is on our website, and that is one of the ways that we have been, fortunately, able to address the realities of electronic practice. These are really challenging issues. I'm very pleased that the college took steps to address issues of mobility and electronic practice before the pandemic, and certainly all of these issues are not fully sorted through. But just to emphasize again, the college's fundamental role is to protect the public. It isn't to promote members' practice, whether that be virtual or in person.
Thank you, Lise. We have a question related to AHMED. I recognize that the AHMED format this year is being completed online due to the ongoing pandemic. As a member who does not live in Toronto, will the college consider continuing to hold AHMED in a virtual format moving forward to allow and support more members in attending these learning days?
Well, thank you for this great question as well, because I think, we've talked about that there have been so many challenges in this past year and in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. And sometimes we spend time talking about the challenges as opposed to the opportunities. And I think you've raised a great opportunity that has arisen as a result of the fact that the college is conducting its operations remotely, and that AHMED is fully virtual this year. Just to perhaps remind you or let some members know, in an effort to reach members outside of the GTA, the college has for many years now offered educational forums across the province, so north, west, and east. But of course, that isn't necessarily the same reach as having a virtual AHMED with so many people in attendance today. So we're looking at those issues very, very carefully, balancing them with what we also hear from members in terms of some of the benefits of in-person events. And I can really assure you that we will look very, very carefully at these opportunities moving forward in the best way to address exactly what you're raising in your question. So thanks very much.
We have a question related to the OCSWSSW Education Training Fund. Is the college able to advocate with provincial government to reinstate the education training funding? The 3-year pilot ended, and I was wondering if there is any update.
Right. So The college, while it was involved in the Social Worker and Social Service Worker Professional Development Fund, and was very pleased to work with the Ontario Association of Social Workers on that fund, and the OASW was successful in obtaining some different funding for professional development opportunities. All of that information can be found on the college's website. And in terms of having specific questions about that funding, I would suggest that you go to our website and link to the OASW for specific questions, because they would be in a better position to speak to your question.
Thank you, Lise. Going forward, a virtual AHMED would mean, this is a comment. Going forward, a virtual AHMED would mean greater opportunities to participate. A combination of in-person and virtual would be ideal for people in remote and isolated parts of the province. So that's just a follow-up comment to that question earlier.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question from another member. As a disabled college member, I applaud the college's goal towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, I am disheartened at the fact that the disabled social workers are not overtly referred to, nor are the workshops geared towards acknowledgement of the systemic barriers we often face. What, other than a committee, is the college going to do to address systemic barriers to disabled people in particular?
Thank you for this a very good question, and you probably, I think you may be noticing that the newly created Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Group refers to the representation of the group, but not to the diversity of each of the individual members, including in relation to issues of accessibility. In terms of your concerns about accessibility of the various breakout sessions today, I would really encourage you perhaps to share some of those specific concerns directly with our communications team, so that we can understand specifically what those concerns might be and how we might make progress towards a continued progress towards ensuring accessibility. So I think that, when referring to a task group, I think the work of the college's newly created task group will be really important in looking at our organizational policies and processes, because that will help us to consider how we can ensure that we are not creating barriers, and we are removing barriers that may exist, because of course we are engaging in this process with humility, recognizing that we may not necessarily be aware of all the barriers that members of the college may be experiencing. So we really want to know about that. I should say that the work of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Group is critically important, but the work of addressing issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion did not begin with the creation of the task group. These are ongoing considerations at the college, and they'll continue to be ongoing considerations.
Thank you, Lise. I think we have time for maybe one more question, which I'll read aloud now. And as a reminder, all questions, if there are additional ones that are outstanding, we are committed to responding to those questions to members specifically within the next 2 weeks. So we will be in touch if there are additional questions that come through. So the question that I have here, does the college provide mentoring opportunities throughout the year?
I'm assuming that that question relates to mentoring opportunities for college members, and the short answer would be no. Mentorship between college members is not something that really falls under the college's mandate or our regulatory activities, but it is nevertheless a very important aspect of practice. And there are other places or organizations where that kind of mentoring may take place through faculties of social work, social service work programs and through professional associations. So if this question kind of relates to something that either you might like to be involved in, whether as a mentor or a mentee, I would encourage you to explore opportunities at those other organizations.
Thank you, Lise. I am going to take a moment just to read. We have somebody from the OASW that did provide a comment related to the Professional Development Fund. Just to note that the OASW continues to be supported by government in providing free training opportunities for both social workers and social service workers. You can visit their website at oasw.org/OLC for more details. And I think that will end today's question period, and I'll invite Mukesh, our council president, for closing remarks.
Thank you, Sarah and Lise, and members for a robust question and answer period. So I really appreciate all the questions that we've had today. And feel free to send any other questions that you may have to the college, and I'm sure staff will be happy to address that in a reasonable time. Let me just state that a lot of questions with regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion today, which is very welcome and also encouraging, because the work has begun, and we look forward to engaging with not only council members, but non-council members who are part of that task group. Their first meeting, as I understand it, will be later this month. And you know, it's important to note that with regards to the disability question, that although we do have a terms of reference for this working group, task group, the terms of reference, in my view, and I'm sure in the council's view, is a fluid document. So during the work of this group, if there are matters that arise that needs to be addressed, I am sure that the task group will bring those forward, and that we'll amend as necessary to ensure that we really truly are addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion, not only for the groups that are listed, however, any other matters that may arise. So I thank you for those questions, and we look forward to the work of that group. So again, thank you, Lise, for your answers, and to Sarah. This, my friends, concludes business to be conducted at the 21st annual meeting of the college. I thank you for your attendance and participation. Much appreciated.